Here we have a vector question, and we have 2 points, A and B. And we know that this is A and this is B because we have the word respectively. So that means the first corresponds to the first and the second corresponds to the second. We are being asked for the vector between points A and B. So the vector AB is the difference between the position vector OB minus the position vector OA. And the position vector OB will be the coordinates of B written as a vector. So this is the vector OB, and this is the vector OA. We want the difference between the two. So we simply subtract 5 minus 4 to give you 1, minus 8 minus 3 to give you minus 11, etc. So that's the vector AB. The question then goes on to say find the magnitude of this vector. So the magnitude is a scalar. It's a number representing the length of this vector. So we do that by calculating the square root of the square of each of these. So that's your 1, that's your negative 11, and that's your negative 4. So you square these, add them together, and then put them under a square root. And so that is your answer for the magnitude of the vector AB. Part C asks for the product. It's called the dot product or the scalar product of OA and OB. So to multiply two vectors, what you do is you multiply the I components, the J components, and the K components. That's the X, Y, and Z components. But then you add them together. So the result is not a vector. So the result, after you add these together, what you get is a scalar and not a vector. So we don't have an I and a J and a K component. What we have is a single number. So the product of OA times OB, we call this the dot product, or sometimes we call it the scalar product. So the scalar product, or the dot product, of these two vectors is simply 7. The question then goes on to tell us about another vector, u, and it tells us that u is perpendicular to OB, and it asks us for the value of this constant lambda. So when you see the word perpendicular, what that means is that the two vectors are at right angles. So if this is one vector, let's say this is u, and this was OB, it means that the angle between the two is 90 degrees. Okay? And that's important because knowing that we're talking about 90 degrees, it means that the cosine of the angle is 0. And we know in vectors we can find the cosine by finding the dot product. So if the vectors are perpendicular, we know that the cosine is going to be 0, and therefore this numerator, the dot product, has to be 0. So that means u and OB, if we were to multiply them, we would get 0. So u dot OB is 0. This is the really important step. Whenever you see perpendicular or right angles, you know that the dot product is going to be equal to 0. So u is given in the question, and OB, we've used it before, it's in the question. And setting these two side by side, we can simply say, well, for this to be a dot product, it means 3 multiplied by 5 and lambda plus 2 multiplied by -8 and 5 lambda multiplied by 2. When you add them all together, you should get 0. And if you multiply that out and you multiply that out and you multiply that, you get a linear equation in lambda. 15 minus 16 is -1. If you move that to the other side, by adding 1 to both sides, you have 1. And -8 lambda plus 10 lambda gives you 2 lambda. If you divide both sides by 2, you end up with a value of lambda equals half. So that is our answer. So for lambda equals half, that is the value of lambda that will make u perpendicular to OB. So now we can now rewrite u as 3, 2.5, 2.5, because lambda plus 2 will be 2.5 and 5 times 1/2 will be 2.5. So this is our vector u, but the question wasn't asking for that, it was simply asking for lambda. So I hope you found that helpful.